He slid the cashier's check across the polished wood desk without looking at me. "Here," he said. "That's 50,000. This finalizes the estate transition. It's a clean break for everyone." I looked at his hands, smooth, manicured, not a scar in sight. My own hands, resting on the leather armrest, were wrinkled, stiff, and aching from the morning cold. But they still had strength in them, strength he had long stopped seeing. The bank's wealth manager, Mr. Sterling, sat awkwardly behind his monitor, pretending not to hear. The room smelled of expensive carpet and air freshener. My son Robert, an investment banker, sat in the chair beside me like a man doing charity. His suit was perfectly pressed. His watch was worth more than I'd ever spent on myself in a single year. I took the check without a word and slipped it into my handbag, the same bag he'd mocked years ago for being outdated. Then I looked him right in the eyes. He smiled, satisfied. "Now you won't have to worry about anything anymore. You're all set." I smiled too. "Thank you, Robert. That was very thoughtful." He didn't hear the ice behind my words. Or maybe he didn't care. He stood up and clapped his hands together. "All right then. I've got to get to the office. You'll sign the papers with Mr. Sterling. He'll walk you through it. I've already handled everything, streamlined the estate, consolidated the assets. You'll have your little nest egg, and the rest is in good hands now." I nodded as if impressed. He kissed me on the cheek, barely touching my skin. "Take care of yourself, Mom." Then he left the bank office with his usual quick, confident stride, the walk of someone who thought he'd won. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. "Mrs. Vance, would you like to go over the documents now?" I took my time opening my handbag, took out my glasses, and slipped them on calmly. "No, Mr. Sterling," I said, folding my hands. "I won't be signing anything today." He blinked. "I beg your pardon?" I said no. I repeated, this time a little more firmly. "None of these documents are valid. The powers of attorney were revoked last month. Robert no longer has access to anything of mine." "Mr. Sterling looked at me as though I had just stood up and started singing. I wasn't aware." "You wouldn't be," I said gently. Robert thought he was clever, but I've been alive long enough to know what it means when someone starts handling things without asking. I pulled another envelope from my handbag, one with the letterhead of my lawyers. "This is the only document that matters today." Mr. Sterling took the envelope with visible hesitation. He opened it, read it silently, then looked at me, stunned. "Everything. It's already been transferred to a new trust." "That's right," I said. "Robert was never meant to be my keeper. He just never realized I stopped being his safety net a long time ago." I stood up slowly, the ache in my knees sharp but manageable. "I'll be taking the check my son gave me. I'm sure he'll be needing it soon." Mr. Sterling didn't say anything. I left him staring at the papers, his mouth slightly open. Outside, the crisp Boston wind hit my face like a fresh slap of truth. I stood on the steps of the bank, the city bustling around me, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not revenge, relief. I hadn't come here today to make a scene. I had come to make a decision, and now that it was made, the weight lifted. I walked back to my car, an old Buick that had seen better years, but so had I. I sat behind the wheel, took a deep breath, and allowed myself a single chuckle. All I had ever given him, and he thought I'd settle for 50,000. He really didn't know me at all. The house smelled like lemons and wood polish. Not because I had cleaned that morning, I hadn't, but because that scent had soaked into the walls over decades. This was the house we bought in 1978. 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, and a yard Thomas always promised to fix up properly, but never quite did. We raised Robert here. Every corner had some remnant of that. A scuff on the hallway wall from his tricycle, a loose doorknob he'd pulled too hard in a tantrum when he was 9. I hung my coat on the old iron hook by the door. It was slightly bent. Thomas had meant to replace it the week he died. In the living room, sunlight filtered through the lace curtains. The mantel was cluttered with pictures, mostly dusty, some leaning from where I'd never straightened the frames. Thomas on a fishing boat with Robert, holding up 2 small trout. Me and Thomas at our 30th anniversary, grinning like fools. Robert at his college graduation, barely looking at the camera. His eyes were already somewhere else by then. I think that was the last time he hugged me without an appointment. I eased into my chair by the window, the one that had formed itself to my shape over time. The springs sighed under me. Funny, isn't it? How slowly things change. Not all at once, not with slamming doors or screaming fights, just little things. Fewer phone calls, shorter visits, more advice than questions. It had started small. Robert needed help with rent after grad school. I gave it. Then it was the down payment on the condo. Then the emergency dental surgery for his wife. Then the tutoring for the twins. Then the second car. Then the landscaping. Then. Each time he said, "Just this once." Each time I believed him. The old accounting ledger from our family's manufacturing business held the history. I used to write in cursive. Then my hands got stiff, and I switched to block letters, one entry after another. Neat lines in blue ink. Robert Vance, Robert Vance, Robert Vance. I once joked to Thomas, he ought to put me on payroll. Thomas just shook his head and said, "He's our boy. That's what we do." But that was before Thomas died. After that, it was just me and Robert's needs. I went to the secretary desk now, opened the top drawer, and pulled out the old leather-bound ledger. I had continued to use it, relabeling a section personal loans. I flipped it open. Pages of photocopies, notes, receipts. A $15,000 for the tech startup that folded in 18 months. $25,000 for the second mortgage I co-signed and later paid. $10,000 for his daughter's private school tuition. I knew these numbers by heart. I knew them because I kept telling myself, this is the last time. Until the last time became today. $50,000 in a cashier's check. It's a clean break, he'd said. I smiled now without humor. That money was going right back into the trust. I rose slowly, my joints crackling like dry twigs. My body had aged, yes, but not my mind, not my sense of what was fair, of what I deserved. Robert thought I was slipping. He thought I was fading. But all he saw was what he wanted to see. An old woman, too soft to notice the door quietly closing behind her. He never stopped to ask what I needed, only what I could give. And now, I was done giving. The phone rang. Not a shrill ring, but that soft, classic tone I'd never changed. I picked it up. "Grandma?" My heart softened. I would have known that voice in a crowd. "Hi, Alex. Everything all right?" Yeah, I just wanted to check in. I know Dad said you had some bank stuff today. I wanted to see how you're doing." Alex, my grandson, Robert's youngest, a young teacher at a public school, living in a cheap apartment. He insisted on paying for himself. The only one who still called just to talk. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tying up some things. But your call, that's the best thing I've heard all day." He chuckled. "Want me to stop by tomorrow? I can bring some books from the school library. I think you'd like." "I'd love that," I said, my voice cracking a little. "You know something, Alex. You're a good man, and you've never asked me for a thing." He hesitated, like he didn't know what to do with that. Well, you've done plenty for us. I just wish, Dad. Let's not talk about him now, I interrupted gently. I'll see you tomorrow. Okay. Love you, Grandma. Love you too. After I hung up, I stood there for a long time, staring at the quiet phone. Not everything I gave was wasted. I first met Miss Albright in a cramped office on Walnut Street almost 20 years ago, when Thomas and I still did our taxes ourselves and thought hiring a lawyer was something only the very rich did. She wore a gray blazer and glasses that magnified her eyes in a way that made her seem permanently surprised, but she was anything but naive. She was the first person I called after I got home from the bank. Now, sitting across from her in that same office, albeit with newer carpet and fancier computers, I felt the calm I'd been missing for years. I handed her the check Robert had given me. She didn't look at it. He thinks he won, I said, my voice steady. Miss Albright nodded. And he doesn't know you've already revoked his access to the estate. He has no idea. I went through Mr. Sterling at the bank. All authorizations were pulled last month. Robert's name is off everything. I made sure of that before I even told him I was going to the bank today. Miss. Albright smiled softly, the kind of smile people give you when they think you've finally come around to something they knew all along. I should have done it years ago. I added, but you didn't feel ready. No, I felt guilty. She didn't comment. That was her strength, silence that made space for truth. He's my son, I said after a moment. I wanted to believe that if I just helped enough, just gave him the chance, the start, the support, he'd eventually see me as more than a bank account with a pulse. I stared at the pale green folder she was assembling in front of her. My name, typed on the tab. She was gathering the documents I'd need for the new trust. Not Robert's name on the beneficiary line. Not anymore. Do you still want to proceed with transferring full ownership of your estate into the new trust? She asked. I nodded. And the primary beneficiary? My grandson, Alex, I said. He's the only one who visits because he wants to, not because he's angling for something. The only one who's ever said thank you without a string attached. Miss Albright scribbled something on a yellow pad. And Robert? Not a cent. She looked up, pausing just long enough to see if I was wavering. I'm not angry, I added. I'm just done. I have nothing left to explain to him. He decided who I was years ago, and now he can live with it. We went over the formalities. Miss Albright was efficient. She explained each clause in plain language, the structure of the irrevocable trust, the healthcare directives, the will revisions. I signed where needed, initialed where asked. After about an hour, she leaned back, satisfied. It's all in motion, she said. Once Alex comes in to sign his part, we'll finalize the filing. If anything happens to you, your assets are protected. Robert has no legal claim. Not unless you change your mind. I won't, I said. You always were the sharpest woman in this town, she smiled. You just spent too many years pretending not to be. On my way out, I passed the secretary's desk. A vase of fresh flowers sat near the phone. Lilies. Thomas hated lilies, said they smelled like funerals. I smiled at the memory. Outside, the October air bit through my coat, but it felt good, bracing, honest. I stood on the sidewalk for a minute before getting into my car, letting the cold remind me that I was still here, still standing. Robert thought he'd buried me in paperwork, tucked me away in an apartment I hadn't picked, paid for my groceries with money I once earned myself, and called it generosity. But I wasn't buried. Not yet. I was still the woman who'd helped run a business, who'd nursed her husband through 2 rounds of surgery, who saved every receipt, read every contract, and paid every bill on time, even when it meant going without. I was still her, and she had finally had enough. There's a ledger in the back of my filing cabinet I hadn't touched in years, leather-bound, fraying at the corners, with a rubber band holding it closed. Not because it was private, but because it was full. I took it out the evening after seeing Miss Albright, set it down on the kitchen table, and sat with it the way people sit with old letters from the war. Not fondly, just quietly. The label read, Family Loans. Inside were receipts, statements, printouts, checks I'd written, copies of transfers, notes in my own handwriting, each one a reason I had given myself to say yes. $18,200 loan for emergency roof repair, $5,000 bridge money for his wife's boutique, which she sold 6 months later, $6,400 for the twins' summer STEM camp, $14,000 partial tuition when they missed a scholarship deadline, $7,500 legal retainer when his business partner sued him, $2,100 credit card payoff. Just this once. I could go on, he used to say. I just need a little help to get over this hump. But somehow, Robert's life was one long hill, and I was the wind at his back. I read each line slowly, not because I couldn't read fast, but because each number came with its own memory, his voice, his face, the way he'd act surprised that I needed time to think, the way he'd get quiet, then disappointed, then cold. Don't worry about it. Forget I asked. So I'd cave every time, because I couldn't stand that coldness, because I wanted to stay useful, because I wanted him to love me, or at least remember that I was a person. And what did I get? Last Christmas, he brought a gift in a designer bag, a bottle of expensive, cloyingly sweet dessert wine. I only drink dry red. A note read, Thanks for everything. Everything. I flipped through the ledger and reached the final pages. Statements from the joint investment account we'd opened when Thomas passed, the one Robert was supposed to help me manage. Last year's balance, $1.2 million. This year, $1.35 million. I stared at the numbers. I remembered asking Robert if we were on track. He'd smiled, patted my hand, and said, You've got nothing to worry about, Mom. I've been reinvesting. It's all working for you. I hadn't asked for proof, hadn't demanded passwords. I didn't want to seem suspicious, but now I understood. He wasn't helping me manage my money. He was helping himself to it. And then came today, the final insult, $50,000 in a cashier's check, like he was closing a tab. That check was still on the counter. I hadn't even looked at it closely. Maybe I never would. Maybe I'd frame it, a tiny square symbol for a lifetime of blind love. I put everything back in the ledger, removed the rubber band, and took out a pen. I added a note to the final page in red ink. Total given, over $1 million. Total returned, $0. Total respect shown, variable, usually unavailable. I replaced the ledger in the drawer, closed it, and stood in the kitchen, with my palms flat on the table. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the wall clock. I thought of Thomas. I thought of how he used to mutter when the kids asked for too much. We're not raising a boy. We're training a tax deduction. He always meant it as a joke. I wonder what he'd say now. Then I thought of Alex. Sweet, lanky Alex with his coffee-stained shirts and crooked smile. He still called to ask how my week was going. He still asked if I needed the gutters cleaned. He brought me books from his school's library he thought I'd like, and then actually asked me what I thought of them. And he never once asked for a cent. I walked to the living room, where the evening sun was spilling in, warm and amber, over the couch cushions. I sat down slowly, my knees giving that familiar, dull protest. I reached for the notepad I kept by the phone and wrote one sentence at the top of a fresh page. Tomorrow, I begin again. I didn't sleep that night. Not from worry, not anymore, but from a strange kind of clarity. It was as if my mind had swept the floor clean after decades of clutter. Everything I had let slide, excused, and overlooked now lay in bright light, and I wasn't turning away. At 7:15 the next morning, I brewed a pot of coffee and set the small kitchen table for two cups, 2 plates. I even took out the peach jam I usually saved for Sundays. Alex was coming by. He always came on Saturdays, like clockwork. Only now, I had something to give him that no one had ever given me. Not money, not advice, but trust. He arrived at 8:05, 5 minutes late by his own standards. I saw his car pull up from the front window, the way I used to watch Robert's when he still visited unannounced. He knocked once, then let himself in. "Morning, Grandma," he said, setting his bag by the door. "You're late," I teased, already pouring coffee. "Don't fire me yet. I've got a pie to make up for it." He placed the box on the table. From Lucy's bakery, not the cheap supermarket. Peach crumble. "You trying to make me cry first thing in the morning?" I asked, and he laughed. That deep, warm laugh that always made him seem older than his 24 years. We sat, we ate, we talked about nothing. How the neighbor's maple was finally turning red. How the heating bill was going to be brutal this year. How my porch swing was still holding on despite one chain looking suspicious. And then I said it, quietly, clearly. "I want to change my will." He stopped mid-bite. "Okay," he said carefully, wiping his mouth. "You're sure?" "I'm sure of a lot of things now. I'm sure I spent too long pretending I wasn't disappointed. I'm sure your father sees me as a line item. I'm sure I've confused being needed with being loved. But most of all, I'm sure that you've earned what he never bothered to ask for, my trust." Alex sat very still. His face didn't light up. It didn't fall. He just listened. "I'm not leaving you money so you can owe me," I continued. "I'm doing it so you can be free. So you never have to become someone like your father, a man who calls helping people a burden, who thinks dignity is something he gets to distribute like allowance." Alex was quiet for a long time. "I don't want your money, Grandma," he said finally. "I know," I smiled. "That's why you deserve it." We talked through the details. I explained what Miss Albright and I had already prepared. The trust, the inheritance protections, the clause about charitable donations if he ever changed his mind. He listened with the kind of patience Robert never had, as if what I said might matter more than what he wanted to say next. When we finished, I walked over to the drawer and pulled out the ledger labeled Family Loans. "I want you to read this someday," I said. "Not now. Not while it's still fresh. But I want you to understand how people let themselves become invisible, one favor at a time." He took it, didn't open it, just placed it gently back on the table. Then he looked at me in that way only Alex ever had, not like a man looking at an old woman, but like a boy trying to understand how someone he loved could have been overlooked for so long. "I'll sign whatever you need me to," he said. "But just so you know, I'd still come every Saturday, even if all you left me was the peach jam." That was the moment I knew I was doing the right thing. Monday morning, I dressed with more care than usual. A dark green cardigan, slacks that didn't itch at the knees, the brooch Thomas gave me the year Robert was born. Not because I expected applause, but because sometimes dignity starts with buttons done properly and shoes that shine, even if no one's looking. At 9:45, I parked at the bank. My old Buick hummed as I turned the key off Loyal, a little loud, but it had never let me down, unlike some people. Inside, I was met with the usual corporate brightness, piped-in jazz music, a fresh coffee scent, plastic plants too symmetrical to be real. But I wasn't here for aesthetics. Mr. Sterling, my account manager, stood to greet me, as polite as always, in that way men are when they're used to assuming older women just want help finding their PIN numbers. Mrs. Vance, good morning. Everything all right with your accounts? I have a few questions, Mr. Sterling, I said as we walked toward his office. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. I took it without small talk. He looked a little nervous, maybe because the last time I was in, I had revoked Robert's financial authorizations without warning. I want to confirm some recent activity, I said, pulling a folded sheet from my purse. Specifically, any transactions linked to the joint investment account. He typed quickly, his eyes flicking across the screen. Yes, I see it here. Quite a bit of movement earlier this year. Several disbursements and fund reallocations, all within authorized access at the time. But that access was removed 4 weeks ago. I finished for him. He nodded. Correct. Since then, only you have access. Would you like a full breakdown? Print it. As the printer hummed, I leaned back and watched him. A young man. Nice enough, but he looked at me the way people look at faded portraits, with distance. They see the outline, but not the life. He handed me the sheets. Total withdrawn by Robert in the last 18 months, over $120,000. I didn't flinch. I already knew. Can you flag this account? I asked. Any attempts to access or modify, I want to call. Of course. And the retirement savings? I continued. Have any automatic withdrawals been scheduled? Let me check. His eyes scanned again. There was an authorization request submitted online last week. It was flagged. It didn't match your current access settings. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He's still trying. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. Would you like to set a secondary alert? Maybe notify your legal team as well? I already did. My lawyer has copies of everything. We finalized a few other updates, removed old contact numbers, added a backup security word. I chose Peaches because why not? I thanked him, stood, and shook his hand. As I turned to leave, he hesitated. Mrs. Vance? Yes? I just want to say, a lot of people come in here confused, overwhelmed. You're not like that. You seem sure. I paused. That's because I've spent a long time being unsure. It's a kind of sickness, you know, doubt. It creeps into your bones if you let it. But I'm older now. I've learned who to believe. He nodded slowly, like he understood, even if he didn't. Outside, the sky had turned pale with the promise of rain. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing it in. Some people think justice is loud. I don't. Sometimes it's a piece of paper. Sometimes it's a no, said quietly. Sometimes it's a line on a screen that says, unauthorized access denied. He rang the doorbell twice, then knocked his old rhythm from childhood, the one he used when he forgot his keys after school, and wanted me to open the door quickly. I stood in the hallway, not rushing, just watching the door as if it might open by itself and spare us both what was coming. Another knock. Then his voice. Mom, I know you're home. I opened the door. Robert stood there, in a tailored jacket, expensive shoes, and that forced smile he'd perfected over the years, the one he wore in client meetings and at funerals. He held a paper bag in one hand. Wine, probably. Or that damn sweet wine again. Hi, Mom, he said brightly, stepping forward. Can I come in? That depends, I said, my voice calm. Are you here to visit or to explain? His smile twitched, faltered. Can we talk? I stepped aside without a word. He walked in like he owned the place. just like always. In the living room, he looked around, as if something had changed since his last visit 6 months ago. It hadn't. Still the same faded couch, still the same worn rug. The only thing different was me. "I brought some things," he said, lifting the bag. "Coffee from that little place you like, and, some biscotti. Leave it in the kitchen." He placed the bag on the counter, then stood awkwardly by the table, clearly expecting an invitation to sit. I didn't give one. He sat anyway. "I was surprised to hear you changed the estate documents," he said, as if we were talking about switching hairdressers. "I figured you would be," I replied. He tried to smile again, but it came out crooked. "Look, Mom, I think we've had a misunderstanding. I only set things up at the bank to help. I wanted to take some of the pressure off you." "Is that what you told yourself?" I asked. He leaned forward, his hands clasped, like a man trying to seem humble. It didn't suit him. "I know I haven't always said thank you, but I've handled a lot too. You know, you haven't made things easy." "How so?" He blinked, surprised at being challenged so directly. "Well, you hold on to things. You don't trust anyone. You've always kept your finances a mystery." "Because I had to," I cut in. "Because every time I told you how much I had, it somehow turned into a list of things you needed." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "You're mad about the check," he said finally. "It wasn't meant to be offensive. I just wanted you to feel secure. You always said you hated uncertainty. And you thought 50,000 would buy my silence? My surrender? That's not what I..." Held up a hand, not to silence him, but to save him from digging any deeper. "Robert, I raised you. I know what you look like when you lie. You think because I've gotten quiet over the years that I've gotten weak. But you're wrong. I've gotten tired. There's a difference." He slumped slightly in the chair. "Why now?" he asked, his voice softer. "Why cut me out completely?" I studied him for a long moment. 48 years old, a grown man, a father, and yet here he sat, like a boy being told no for the first time. "Because you stopped seeing me," I said. "You saw my money, my usefulness, my ability to fix, but not me. Not the woman who gave up her career so you could go to private school. Not the one who pulled 2 shifts to pay for your college visits. Not the one who sat up nights calculating how to afford everything you promised you'd repay and never did." He looked down. "People show you who they are when they think you'll always say yes. I just finally said no." Silence filled the room, thick and uncomfortable. The clock ticked behind him. "So that's it?" he asked, not quite hiding the bitterness in his voice. "You're cutting me off?" "No, I'm letting you go." He stood abruptly, pushing the chair back too hard. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. "After everything I've done." "Exactly," I said, standing too. "After everything you've done." He stared at me, his jaw clenched, but found no words. He just picked up his coat, turned toward the door, and walked out without another sound. I waited until I heard the car drive off. Then I sat down and poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot he'd brought. It was still warm, strong, bitter, exactly how I liked it. I didn't cry after he left. I thought I might. I'd braced for it. In fact, like bracing for a rain you're sure is coming, but it never came. Just a steady, quiet emptiness that wasn't sadness anymore, only space. And in that space, I could breathe. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. I walked through the house slowly, not to tidy or fuss, just to see it again as mine. The soft rug Robert once called outdated. The bookshelf he'd once suggested I clear out for when you downsize. Every corner still bore my touch, not his. Thomas's chair was still near the window, the afghan his mother had made still folded over the armrest. I sat there now and let the light fall across my hands that had once washed his tiny feet in the sink, stitched his torn jeans, and written every birthday card, even the years he forgot mine. Letting go wasn't a bang. It was this quiet, still certainty. That afternoon, I opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside were things I hadn't touched in decades. Thomas's letters from his time in the service, my wedding gloves, yellowed now. A little box of Alex's childhood drawings, tied with string, and beneath it all, a red, leather-bound journal I hadn't seen since the year Thomas died. I'd forgotten I'd kept it, started it the day after the funeral. I flipped it open, April 13th. Woke up today, and the house didn't feel like home. Robert cried at the service yesterday, but I think he was scared more than sad. I don't know how I'm going to do this alone, but I will. The entries were short, some barely a paragraph, but they painted a picture even I had stopped looking at. May 7th, Robert wants to quit his job and start a tech company. Says he has a friend who will back him. Asked for $10,000 to cover his end. I said yes. I wish I'd said, give me a plan first. July 29th. Robert didn't come for Thomas's birthday. Said he forgot. I didn't cry. Just made Thomas's favorite lemon cake anyway and sat on the porch alone. And so it went. Over the years, the tone changed. Not into bitterness, but into something colder. Resignation. As if I was recording weather. Sunny, rainy, neglected. I turned to the last entry, dated 6 years ago. November 2nd. He asked again. Said it was the last time. It never is. I don't know what hurts more. That he asks, or that I keep saying yes. I closed the journal. That was the woman I had been. Loyal to a fault, generous past reason, convinced that love was something you proved through sacrifice, but not anymore. I carried the journal to the fireplace, opened the grate, and stood for a long time with the pages in my hands. I thought I would burn it, a ritual of sorts. But instead, I turned and placed it gently on the shelf beside Thomas's old pipe and a photograph of us, taken in 1982, sunburned and laughing on a dock. Some things didn't need to burn. They just needed to be seen. That evening, I wrote a letter. Not to Robert, not to anyone who owed me anything, but to myself, to Eleanor. You are not a mistake, not a backup, not a burden. You are not too much or not enough. You are not your sacrifices. You are not the quiet place people come to rest and forget to thank. You are a woman who survived loss, gave more than was asked, and still found the strength to say, enough. Some people will never see you, but you see you now, and that is enough. Love me. I folded the letter and placed it in the nightstand drawer. Tomorrow, I would call Miss Albright. We would begin transferring the estate formally, not just the money from the manufacturing business, but the house, the stocks, the little things that people don't notice until they're told they can't have them. Tomorrow, I would do what Robert never expected, live like I belonged to myself. It had rained in the night, not a storm, just a soft, persistent drizzle that left the streets washed and the air smelling like earth and wet bark. I stood by the window in Thomas's old flannel robe, nursing a second cup of tea, watching the drops glide slowly down the glass. I had a phone appointment with Miss Albright at 10, but before that, I needed to do something I'd been putting off for years. I pulled down the metal box from the hallway shelf, the one with our marriage papers, old insurance forms, and deeds. Beneath the folders was something else, The original business plan for our company, rolled and tied with a ribbon. I hadn't opened it since Thomas's funeral. I untied the ribbon and carefully unrolled the yellowing page. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. Eleanor, you are always the brains of this operation. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. Especially not our son, who has my charm but your checkbook. Love, always, Thomas. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I just slipped the note out and held it. The thing about strength is, people see it and think they get to lean on it forever. They forget it costs you something. I'm asking you now, Thomas had written. Don't let anyone drain the rest of you. I folded the note and sat with it in my lap. Outside, a single red leaf floated down from the big oak tree and stuck to the window for a moment before slipping away. Like everything, eventually. At 9:55, I went to my desk and dialed Miss Albright's number. Morning, Mrs. Vance, she answered, promptly as always. I've got all the documents ready. We can sign remotely or in person, whichever you prefer. In person, I said, and I want to add something, not to the trust, to the will. Of course. I want a letter included, a personal one, sealed, to be given only to Alex when the time comes. I'll have it notarized and attached. And another thing, I took a breath. I'd like to write a clause for charitable giving. Our local community college has an engineering program for craftsmen. If I go before I've had the chance, I want a portion of my estate to go there, to a scholarship fund. Under Thomas's name. Miss Albright paused, then said with a rare softness in her voice, That's beautiful, Eleanor. We'll make it happen. Thank you. After the call, I pulled a blank page from the drawer and began writing the letter to Alex. No legal terms, no instructions. Just words from me, the woman who'd loved quietly and finally learned to speak with clarity. Alex, when you read this, I'll be gone, but don't let that bring you sorrow. You gave me more peace in my last years than I ever knew in my prime. You reminded me that kindness can exist without condition, that respect isn't a transaction, that a heart doesn't have to be pried open to be offered. I hope you live your life full of your own decisions, not weighed down by someone else's guilt. I hope you say no when you need to, and yes, when it's yours to give freely. You were the only one who saw me. That mattered more than anything. Love, Grandma. I signed it, sealed it, and placed it next to Thomas's note. 2 quiet truths, to be opened when they were needed, not before. The lawyer's office was quiet when I arrived. Not empty, just the kind of quiet that comes from thick carpet, old wood, and people who speak in low, decisive tones. Miss Albright's assistant greeted me with a warm smile, offered tea, and led me to the same room we'd sat in 2 weeks prior. Miss Albright was already there, papers neatly stacked, a pen beside them. No small talk this time. She knew I wasn't here to chat. The documents are ready, she said. The trust, the revised will, and the charitable clause, all filed and backed up. Once you sign today, it's legally binding. Good, I said, taking my seat. Let's do it. She passed me each sheet with steady hands. I read every word, not because I doubted her, but because it mattered that I owned every line. The trust was in Alex's name, not to be touched until he turned 30, except for emergency use with documented approval. Sensible, protected, fair. The will named no primary family beneficiaries, not Robert, not his wife, not the twins who hadn't spoken to me since the Christmas I didn't buy them the gaming console they wanted, just Alex and the scholarship fund. I've included a clause, Miss, Albright said, tapping one of the pages. that if Alex declines or becomes ineligible, the estate goes into the scholarship fund in your name. I nodded. It felt right. No one would ever again say my name and think of it as a checkbook. If they spoke of me, they'd speak of something planted, not handed out. When it came time to sign, I took the pen carefully. My hands were steadier than I expected. Each stroke of the pen felt like a door closing, not with anger, but with finality. Miss Albright notarized the signature. "It's done," she said. "Unless you change your mind, this is now the legal structure of your estate." "I won't change my mind." She studied me for a moment. "You know," she said, almost shyly, "I see a lot of women come in here late in life. Some are still waiting for permission. You're not." I looked at her and smiled. "I stopped waiting. That's all. You'd be amazed how clear things become when you realize no one's coming to save you, and you don't need them to." We shook hands. As I was gathering my purse, she reached into a drawer and handed me a small envelope. "I took the liberty of printing your letter to Alex on cotton paper. It'll keep longer. This copy is sealed and filed with the estate. But this," she tapped the envelope in my hand, "this one's yours to give now or keep." I thanked her, took the envelope, and left. Outside, the sky had cleared. The wind had lost its chill. I stood on the curb for a while, feeling the weight of nothing. No guilt, no fear, no should-haves buzzing in my ears. Just a quiet knowing. I drove home with the window cracked, letting in the scent of dry leaves. I passed the gas station where Robert once insisted I let him pay, and then used my credit card anyway. I passed the cafe where I used to meet other widows for coffee, where we'd all pretend our children called more than they did. At home, I placed the envelope on the nightstand beside Thomas's note. Later that day, I called the local community college and asked for the director. "Yes, hello," I said when she picked up. "My name is Eleanor Vance. I'd like to speak to someone about making a private donation." The director paused, probably expecting something modest. "Would you be open," I continued, "to a partnership that would fund an entire scholarship program for students in engineering and the trades? I'd like it to bear my husband's name." There was a silence, then a flurry of gratitude and flustered professionalism. "No publicity," I added. "I'm not doing this for a plaque. Just do good with it." After the call, I sat back in Thomas's chair and looked around my living room. So many years spent wondering if I was making the right choices for other people. Now, finally, I was making them for me. I was surprised by how much was still left after all the withdrawals, the favors, the quiet disappearances of large sums masked as temporary help. I'd assumed what remained of my estate would be a shadow of what it once was, but when I sat down with the financial auditor, Miss Albright recommended a soft-spoken woman named Clarissa with a tidy notebook and an even tidier mind. I learned the truth. "You're not broke, Mrs. Vance," she said, flipping to the final page of her folder. "You're far from it." She'd gone over every account, every stock, every bond, cross-referencing them with 10 years of tax filings and all the disbursements made under Robert's previous access. "You lost nearly $1 million, she said gently, "but you still have just over $5 million remaining, including the house and its equity." I blinked. I don't know why I was surprised. Maybe because so many years of depletion had made me forget I'd once been a woman who saved, who invested, who refused to buy what she couldn't pay off by the end of the month. $5 million. After all that, Clarissa passed the summary sheet across the desk. "You've weathered worse storms than you realize." I looked at the total, then at her. "No," I said. "I just stopped pretending the leak wasn't there." She smiled. not quite getting it, but polite enough to let the comment pass. We talked for another 20 minutes about how to manage the funds moving forward, the trust structures, the charitable commitments, the safe growth options. It was the kind of conversation I used to imagine Thomas and I would have in retirement, sipping tea, dreaming of little luxuries. Only now, it was just me. But for the first time, that didn't feel like a deficit. It felt like ownership. I have one more question, I said as I stood to leave. How quickly could someone drain these accounts if they had access? Clarissa didn't miss a beat. Quickly. One wire transfer. The right passwords. And it could all be gone in hours. And if they didn't know I'd locked them out, they'd likely find out when the transfer failed. Good, I said, and shook her hand. Back home, I stood in my kitchen and looked at the same white stove I'd had for 30 years. I had enough money to replace every appliance, knock out a wall, redo the floors. But I didn't want to. I'd rather spend it on someone else's better future than on marble countertops. I picked up the phone and called Alex. Hey, Grandma, he answered on the second ring. His voice was like balm on a sunburn. You busy tomorrow? Not if you need me. I want to show you something, I said. Bring a notebook. He hesitated. Are we doing estate stuff? Yes, I said, but not the kind you think. The next day, he arrived in jeans and a sweatshirt, looking like the boy I used to pick up from soccer practice. We sat in the dining room, me with my old tin box of savings ledgers, and him with a new leather-bound notebook already filled with tabs and notes. I showed him how I'd done it, the way Thomas and I had saved our first $10,000 by putting $50 a week into a plain blue envelope taped to the back of the pantry shelf. How we never touched that envelope, not even when the roof leaked. He listened, nodded, and asked questions. Why are you showing me all this? He asked at one point, confused. You've already given me the trust. I looked at him hard and smiled. Because money without memory makes fools. I'm not giving you wealth, Alex. I'm giving you a foundation. But if you don't know where it came from, what it cost, you'll spend it like your father did. He swallowed. I won't. I know, I said. That's why you're the one sitting at this table. We sat until the sun went down. I made sandwiches. He offered to do the dishes. I let him. In the quiet afterward, I opened the drawer and took out the envelope Miss Albright had given me his letter. I want you to read this after I'm gone, I said, pressing it into his hand, not before. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just nodded and slid it carefully into his notebook. That night, after he left, I poured myself a glass of wine, the cheap kind, but it tasted good enough. I sat in Thomas's chair and looked around. No fancy renovations, no legacy carved in marble, just this house, this quiet, and the certainty that the rest of what I had would not be wasted. I hadn't set foot in the community college in nearly 2 years. The last time I was there, it was for a local craft fair. My friend Lena had a booth, selling her pottery. Lena tried to smile when we visited her in the nursing home later, but her hands fidgeted the whole time, not with nerves, but with the knowledge that she'd been quietly put away, like a winter coat no one planned to wear again. Now I was back on campus, walking through its double doors, not as a guest, but as a woman with a plan. The receptionist stood as I entered. Can I help you? I have an appointment with Director Merriman, I said. 10 minutes later, I was seated across from a neatly dressed man in his 60s, with kind eyes, and a desk too cluttered for a man trying to look in control. I liked him instantly. I appreciate you coming in, Mrs. Vance, he said. When your lawyer contacted us, I admit I was surprised. I imagine you were. People don't usually donate large sums without strings. And you're donating anonymously? Not exactly anonymously, I said. The scholarship fund will be in my husband's name, the Thomas Vance Memorial Scholarship. No press, no photo ops. Just a simple notice in the course catalog and real improvements. He leaned forward, intrigued. What kind of improvements do you have in mind? I want the engineering and trade programs fully funded, I said. The ones that teach students to build things. You have students who work 2 jobs and still can't afford the tuition. You know that already. But you've been waiting on state funds that'll never come. He nodded slowly. There was no need to pretend. My friend Lena's grandson went here, I added. He dropped out because he couldn't afford the books. He died in a car accident a year later, working a night shift. His face fell. I remember. It was a hard week. It was a cruel week, I corrected. And I promised myself I'd never let our family's money just sit in an account while good kids fell through the cracks. He rubbed his hands together, then looked at me more directly. I want to fix it too, Mrs. Vance. I've just never had the funding. Well, I said, setting a sealed envelope on the desk. You do now. He didn't open it immediately, just stared at it, then at me. Can I ask why you're doing this? Really? I thought for a moment, because I was almost put in a home myself. I said, my son had plans, quiet ones, papers already drafted. He thought if he framed it as concern, I'd go willingly. But he didn't understand that being old doesn't mean being unaware. He was quiet. I'm doing this, I continued, because some of us don't have sons who check on us. Some of us raise them, fund their lives, and still end up alone. I can't fix my son, but I can fix this. He opened the envelope. When he saw the figure, his mouth parted slightly. This will cover the entire program for a decade, he whispered. I know, I said. With enough left for new equipment, too. I did the math. He stood, reached out to shake my hand, then paused. I wish more people were like you. No, I replied. You should wish more people saw people like me before it's too late. On the way out, I passed a classroom where a night class was underway. One woman, older than the rest, sat alone in the corner, her hands folded neatly on her lap. I caught her eye. She smiled politely, as if not to take up too much space. I smiled back, just as polite, but with a little more weight behind it, because I was coming back, not as a patient, but as a woman with a checkbook, a vision, and a name that meant something. Now, it was Alex who told me. He showed up at the door on a Thursday, earlier than usual, holding a grocery bag in one hand and a folded envelope in the other. I could tell by his face it wasn't a regular visit. He set the bag on the counter without a word and followed me into the living room. He knows, he said. I didn't ask who. I saw him, Alex continued, sitting across from me. Dad, I was meeting a friend for coffee, and he was there talking to some guy about legal options. He didn't see me. I waited. He was trying to find out if the trust could be challenged. He said if he could claim you were coerced or mentally unfit. I didn't sigh. I didn't flinch. I just nodded once, like a woman who already expected the storm and had braced the windows days ago. And, I asked. Alex opened the envelope. A printout of an email chain from Robert to a local attorney, followed by a firm response. They told him no. The documents are ironclad, witnessed, notarized. The trust is irrevocable. The estate is no longer under his reach. He can't touch a thing. He passed the pages to me, but I didn't need to read them. I just held them, like a certificate of release. He's angry, Alex added. I know. He said I was being manipulated, that I'm young, that I don't understand how this makes him look. I looked at my grandson, a boy with his father's jawline, but not his posture. He didn't shrink. He didn't beg. He didn't look away. I told him, Alex said, that you were the first person who ever believed in me without expecting anything back. That this wasn't about money. It was about dignity. I felt my throat tighten. But I didn't cry. That part of me had already run dry. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter. He wrote this, asked me to give it to you. I didn't take it. Not yet. Did you read it? Alex hesitated. No. I figured if you wanted to, you would. I nodded and finally reached for it. It was a single sheet, Robert's handwriting, neat, practiced, like everything he'd ever done. I unfolded it and read it silently. Mom, I don't know what you think I've done. Or maybe I do. And I just never expected you to actually push back. I was trying to take care of things. I've always been the one to handle the mess, haven't I? You let me for years, and now, suddenly, I'm the villain. I don't understand how you could do this. Cut me out completely. Reward Alex like he's some saint just because he visits on Saturdays. That's not loyalty, Mom. That's weakness. But fine. If this is what you've decided, then I'll respect it. Just know you've changed the way I see you. Robert. I folded it once, then again, and then placed it under my coffee mug on the table. Do you want me to take it back? Alex asked quietly. No, I said. Let it sit here. It belongs right where he left me, under something heavier. He didn't smile, just nodded. Later that evening, we sat in the kitchen while the kettle boiled. I watched Alex from across the table. He looked tired. Not the kind that comes from work, but from watching someone you love unravel in slow motion. He doesn't hate you, Alex said finally. He just doesn't know how to see you. I reached for his hand across the table. I'm not doing this so he'll hate me, I said. I'm doing this so he'll finally stop mistaking my silence for agreement. Alex squeezed my fingers gently. You think he'll ever understand? No, I said, but that's not my job anymore. I drove out to the community college alone, not because Alex wasn't willing he'd offered twice, but because some things you have to do with your own two hands. I didn't tell him what for. I didn't tell anyone. The new workshop wasn't finished yet, but you could see its bones. Fresh beams, bright insulation, wide door frames. New machinery still in crates stacked neatly beside buckets of grout. I walked the length of it slowly, nodding to the construction workers who barely looked up. Just another old woman passing through. There was a temporary plaque nailed to a plywood wall near the entrance. Future home of the Thomas Vance Trades and Engineering Wing. Built with care, built with love, built with dignity. I stood and stared at it until the air chilled my neck and the wind made my knees ache. But I didn't move, because for the first time in my life, something bore our name without shame or debt attached to it. Not a bill, not an IOU, not a favor to be returned. Just a gesture that meant we were here, and we mattered. When I got home, there was a message on my machine. Mom, it's me, Robert. I just wanted to say, I've been thinking, maybe we could talk. Maybe I didn't handle things right. Just call me back if you want. No apology. Just suggestion. Just noise. I didn't call back. Instead, I sat with a pen and a notepad and made one final list. Not of what I owed or what I'd given that ledger was closed. No, this one was different. What I keep. My name, untouched. My home, warm and quiet. My grandson, kind and steady. My memories, intact. My letter from Thomas. My strength reclaimed. My silence finally earned. Later, I took down a dusty box from the hallway closet. Inside were old photo albums, Christmas cards, a broken ceramic angel from the first nativity set Thomas bought me. At the bottom, beneath yellowed wrapping paper and bent recipe cards, was a stack of Robert's childhood drawings. Stick figures with enormous heads, crayon houses, a mother with spaghetti hair and stars for eyes. I almost tossed them. Almost. But something in me stopped. I placed them back gently, not out of sentiment, not out of softness, but because even if he no longer saw me, I remembered the boy who once did. That was enough. That night, I made myself a proper dinner. Roasted vegetables, toast, a glass of red wine, no frozen tray, no crumbs over the sink. I sat at the table, used a cloth napkin, played Billie Holiday on the old record player, and I didn't feel alone. I felt full. It rained on the day the renovations at the college were completed. Not a heavy rain, just a soft, steady mist that clung to everything and made the new concrete path outside the Thomas Vance wing shine like glass. I stood beneath the overhang, my hands folded, watching as the workers loaded up the last of their equipment, one by one. The director had offered a ceremony, a photo, a speech. I declined them all. I didn't need applause. I needed to know I had done what was right, not for my legacy, but for my peace. Inside, the walls were freshly painted, the workshops filled with new equipment, the air smelling of fresh paint and possibility. As I passed the student lounge, I saw her, the older woman from the night class weeks before. She was in a new chair now, a textbook open on her lap. She looked at me, her eyes clear. "You were here before," she said. "I was. Did you make all this happen?" I smiled softly. "Just a little part." "Well," she said, nodding toward the wall, "it feels like someone finally remembered we're still here." That stayed with me. Back home, I changed into my robe, poured the last of the wine, and sat with Thomas's note one more time. I read it out loud this time, like a prayer, like a vow. Then I reached for the final envelope, the one I hadn't sealed yet, the one for Alex. "Alex, if you're reading this, I'm gone. But don't let that darken your heart. You gave me something in these last years that no one else did. Presence, not performance, not pity. Just presence. I want you to live without guilt, without fear, without the weight of being someone else's redemption project. You owe nothing. You owe no one. Take the money. Use it wisely. But more than that, take the example. Say yes when it matters. Say no when it saves you. Show up. Stay soft. Let people earn your trust, not assume it. You never had to prove yourself to me. You already were the proof that love, real love, can skip a generation and still find its way home. Live well, sweetheart. And when the time comes, pass it on. Love always, Grandma. I sealed it and set it beside his name in the trust folder. Then I turned out the light and let the quiet hold me. I wasn't leaving with bitterness. I wasn't fading with regret. I was ending my story on my terms, with clarity, with strength, with love, and without apology, because I was never just someone's mother, or wife, or bank account. I was someone who saw everything, remembered everything, and finally chose myself. If this story found you at the right time, share it. Tell someone who needs to remember their worth, because it's never too late to reclaim your voice. Not ever.